What's going on YouTube? We are back with another video. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has been uplifting, commenting on my last two videos, my downswing 1 and 2. If you haven't already watched it, go back and watch it, like the video, comment on the video. It was really rough to post that because, you know, it's always a lot funner to post your wins as a poker player and vlogger, but that's not the reality of poker. It is what it is. I'm going to be transparent, but we are back at MGM on the felt, ready to take some chips. It is what it is. This session is going to be covering two different sessions actually that I played at 1-3, and we are going to come here to dominate. We're going to play our game. We're not going to play scared money just because we're on the downswing, and we are going to get on this upswing back immediately. Let's get right into the hands. Appreciate everybody. Like, comment, and subscribe and everything. Let's go.
In the first interesting hand, we glanced down at Ace-10 from the +2. Although you can just fold this hand from earlier positions, I'm at a pretty passive table, so I know raising I'll get a lot of folds, but even if not, I feel confident playing post-flop as the aggressor. All that being said, I raise it up to $15, which is my default with no limps, and get only the big blind to call, which is ideal because now I'm in position as well. The flop isn't very advantageous at all when it appears as 6-4-8, and even worse as the big blind leads for $25, which is close to pot. I don't register this as a monster hand, maybe just a top or middle pair hand that puts me on overcards. So when I glance back at my hand, I do have the ace of diamonds, so I have backdoor flush and straight draws, which for me is good enough to call, so I do. The turn is the king of heart. So not a diamond, but it does hit the overcard range that our opponent might put us on. So now when our opponent decides to check, I know that they feel like their hand is downgraded because a lot of times the preflop raiser is put on ace-king. So when a king appears, that's a great card for you to bluff on as well as bet for value. So I had plans on stealing this pot with a raise, but once checked to, I have to decide on a sizing that isn't too bluffly, but will also put pressure on those middling pairs. So I decided to put out a bet of $60, which is 80% pot, which I feel like is about the same I would bet if I did have ace-king trying to target flop flush draws or pair and straight draws. This bet gets the job done, and she doesn't take too long and lays her hand down. Let's go. As we move along, we see another Broadway holding in king-queen offsuit. First act I raised to $15, next act calls along with the button. So 3 ways to a flop. It is ace, queen, jack, rainbow. On this board, I could range bet as the aggressor or check because often in low stakes, players are going to call pre-flop with any array of Broadway holdings or any array of ace-x combinations. But seeing as that I am drawing to Broadway for a 10, I decide that I can put out a bet. I also have a pair to go along with it. So I put out a wager of $20, a touch under half pot, and that sheds the +2 player but not the button. So we're off to a 4 of club turn, and I decide that trying to get someone to fold an ace at low stakes isn't that wise, so I want to see what my opponent decides to do. And his decision is to check, which does make me feel better about my hand. And even more so when we see the 7 of hearts on the river. Nothing has changed since the flop, so the chance that we have remained the victor at this point in the game is a lot higher. However, I decide to still check because if he has a weak ace, he'll probably call my bet. So when I check, he puts out a bet of $25, and I feel pretty perplexed. I feel like all small aces would just want to get to showdown, and it's only 30% pot size bet, so I feel like he knows that I would call normally, so it's definitely not a bluff. And as I'm thinking, I normally would have called getting such a great price with the odds, but I just decided to just lay my hand down and pick a better spot. And when I do, he shows ace jack for top and bottom pair. And obviously I see that the villain got tricky on the turn with the check, but not this time, buddy. Do y'all think I should have called getting the amazing price, or do you think that was a great exploitative fold? I don't like to be results oriented, so let me know what you think in the comments. Now we are at the apex of Broadway hands with ace-king in the $6 straddle. There is 1 limp from the small blind and big blind raises to $30. I'd say this should close to always be a 3-bet, but this player has just been limp calling a lot of hands, and now he's showing up with a large raise. And since everyone else folded besides the small blind, I'm going to have position the rest of the way. So I just call, and so does the small blind getting a price. Ace-king is obviously best heads up, but 3 ways in position I don't mind. The flop shows up as king 4 deuce with 2 spades. Certainly, this is a great flop having top with the king of spades to go along with it. So the small blind checks and flow, and now the raiser decides to check to me. Now this is pretty weird. I would think that he would range bet here most of the time, but I decided to bet off for $35, thinking I have a pretty good lock on this hand, once again having the king of spades. And so, although I could go a little bit larger, charging the possible flush draws that will call any bet within reason, the small blind decides to check, and it's like he's thinking about making a play, but he ends up folding. The original raiser puts in the call. At this point, I feel like he can have a smaller pocket pair, pocket queens, jacks, tens that he calls because they think I'm just betting now because it checked to me, or he can have a flush draw. I don't have the ace of spades, so it is definitely possible of him having ace queen, ace jack, ace five of spades that wants to play passively. As for hands that I could be behind, I only seen him having aces here with the ace of spade that would play it this way, since that hand would have close to a hammerlock versus most of me in the small blinds holdings. As we move to the 9 of heart turn, he checks and flow again, and now I'm trying to calculate the pot, and I realize the SPR is pretty weird. I have $175 in my stack, and the pot is about $160. I think I should have bet a little bit more on the flop, so it would be less than a 1-to-1 ratio. But as is, I slightly overbet jam the turn. I didn't feel that the smaller underpairs, jack, queens, etc. would hold on for another bet, and I wanted to put max pressure on flush draws. I was happy to see that he hesitated for about 4 seconds and then called. Unfortunately, the river is a 5 of spades, so all his flush draws do get there, but he turns over king queen for a worse top pair. He was a little upset about him making that call, but I told him that when he flops top pair but plays it as a check call instead of betting on his own, he definitely has to call down a lot lighter since I'm capable of having air. So just so we can go over some of the crazy action that happens in the club, I'm going to go over 2 hands that I played. So there's a unelegant raise to $12, 1 call right behind, and on the button we have 6-7 of clubs, my favorite suit. So I call in position, and the small blind decides to call. We are all 4 ways to a flop of 4-5-8 with 2 clubs, as you see. We flop the absolute nuts with a redraw to a straight flush, and when the under the gun raiser checks, the next player, next act just ships it all in. This is a dream spot. We have the best possible hand with a redraw. Even if this person had the nut flush draw, not all his outs are even clean. So of course we call, nothing left to do. Everyone else folds, and this person only has middle pair with a gut shot. He is drawing close to dead to beat me and is only drawing towards a chop. But anyways, we hold on both, and that was a huge hand, and this is the type of players that we're up against. This is crazy. So we have ace-king under the gun. We raise to 12, folds to the button. Re-raises to 40. There's a cold call in the small blind to 40. I could be putting a mandatory 4-bet in this situation, but I haven't heard very much from player 1, so I just call. We're off to a flop 3 ways, ace 5-3. So we now have top pair, top kicker, and when it checks to me, I'm going to check and flow to the aggressor, and he checks as well. The turn is a king of club, putting a flush draw out there, but we have top 2 pair now. So when it checks to me, I'm going to put out a very small bet. There's a possible chance that this player could have a weaker ace and just didn't want to bet the flop. So I put out a small bet of $47, and this gets a spaz raise to $112. Obviously, we're not going to go anywhere, so we call. I was thinking about putting a turn 3 bet, but I want to keep all his bluffs in, and my line will look so strong if I re-raise. So I just call, and we're off to a river, which is another king, giving us a full house. And when we check, I'm trying to decide what he's going to do, and he overbet rips it all in for 473. So now this is when I go into the tank thinking, damn, does he have pocket aces perhaps? I'm just kidding. Obviously, I snap call, and he has queen jack. He turned the gutter ball, tried to bluff me off my hand because of my small size, and just spazzed out on the river. So this is the type of action that I'm dealing with all the time. So join the club if you want. It's in the description, my information. Contact me. I'll get you into the game. There's daily cash outs and bonuses. So like I said, just give me a shout and we'll get you into the game. I appreciate your time. Let's get back to the felt. Unfortunately, I did not get most of the footage for the hand. I do capture it at the end, so just bear with me for a second. But now that I got chirping chips, I'm feeling pretty good, and I decided to expand my range a little bit. So with 7-5s of heart, I call the $15 raise in middle position. Not exactly advisable, but if you're at a table that doesn't have a lot of squeeze-happy players and you're not against a lot of tough opponents, not as big of a mistake. So after my call, the player to my immediate left decides to put in a call as well. It seemed like he wanted to 3-bet for a second, but we're off 3 ways to a flop, which is Jack 10-6 with 2 hearts. So I do flop a flush draw along with backdoor straight draws, and the pre-flop raiser starts off with a curious check, and I'm not going to bet at this because I did think the player behind me was decently strong, and I don't want to get blown off my equity. So I decide to check, and he bets out for $30 into a pot of $45. The original razor quickly folds, and I'm already not liking the sizing because it shows a ton of strength. But since I'm on a draw, it's either I hit my flush on the turn or a high equity card such as an 8 or a 4 giving me a combo draw, or a 7 or 5 giving me a pair and flush outs. So that last bit of jargon is pretty unnecessary because we see the King of Hearts instantly making our flush. Now, a lot of people will just hit their flush and decide to donk out here, but I just decided to put out a check to him and see what he wants to do. He comes to the decision of a $50 bet, and this is where I process what's the best way to proceed. I'm 95% sure here that I have the best holding, but I feel there's a lot of action killing cards between another heart, a board pairing, 4-door straight, etc. So I think that $50 call and then leading the river on a bling is a pretty weird and super strong line that I think he'll fold to. So I just decided to put him all in for the extra $175 he has left, targeting all of his 2 pairs, player plus straight draws, maybe the naked ace or queen of hearts. And he says he doesn't love this spot, says that I'm making a good bet, but says he can't really fold. And then he reveals that he has the queen of hearts, so he has an open-ended straight flush draw. An ace or a 9 of hearts will give him a straight flush. But against my hand, he does have 7 out, so that's only 15% equity though. And so I do want the call, and that is exactly what we get. And I am just holding my breath saying, no heart, no heart, no heart. And we see the 7 of spade bricking out his draw, and we stack him. One of the best feelings in poker. And I know it sounds bad, but this is a cutthroat and zero-sum game, so you got to get it how you live. Let's go. So I am very proud of this hand. We have pocket queens on the button, and I raised it up to $15 when folded to me, and only the big blind decides to call. So heads up to a flop of 9-7-5. I'm glad to still have an overpair here, but the board is super connected. However, I do decide to go out for a bet of $15, knowing that in 1-3, players aren't going to be raising here as bluffs, knowing that this board isn't going to hit my range. So she does just as I thought, and she puts in the call, and we are off to see the 8 on the turn, making this board a disaster now for my hand. There's so many 2-pair and straights available, and now even all the sets are possible for my opponent as calling out the big blind. So when I'm checked to, I don't take much time in checking back, and now we see a 9 on the river pairing the top card. And now once she decides to check to me again, this is a spot where I used to just check back being happy to get the showdown, being that there's 4-door straight and the top card paired. But I decided that if she had trips or a straight, she would definitely bet the river. So I feel like I definitely have the best 2-pair hand, meaning that I beat pocket jacks if she somehow had that. And if she had any flop 2-pair, they're either going to be a full house, which I know she doesn't have because I just canceled those out, or they're going to be counterfeited by the 2 9s on the board. So I decided to put out a very small bet of $20, and she takes about 5 seconds to call, and I show my pocket queens, and she says that we are good. I just want to know, do you think that this was a good thin value bet, or was it too thin perhaps? But either way, we're scooping in the pot, and we're on to the next one. On the opposite spectrum of premium hands, but still pretty, we have 6-5 of diamonds in the small blind. There's a middle position raise to 10. There's 2 calls before it gets to me, and in the small blind, I could definitely be putting in a squeeze here at a decent frequency. Since there is just a small $10 open and 2 calls, but I decided to choose the passive route, and I just call, and the big blind decides to complete. So going off 5 ways to the flop, it is 6-7-4 with 2 hearts. This gives us a pair and an open in the draw, and now the raiser decides to put out a bet of $25. And when it folds to me, this is when I switch gears from passive to aggressive, as I've raised this up to $95. I don't believe the bettor has much, since I've seen him bet close to pot with his strong hands when he has something, and now he's betting less than half with a flush draw on the board. So the only person I'm worried about is the big blind player, but he decides to get out the way. The raiser thinks about it for about 30 seconds, and in that time I'm thinking about what I'm going to do versus his 2 different options. If he calls, I'm jamming absolutely any turn card, even the hearts, because people with flush draws would take a lot sooner to decide what they want to do and call. And if he decides to go all in for another 150 on top of my raise, I'm going to just call. Unless he has a flopped 5-8 in which is Hollywood, and I have good equity versus any holding that he has. But I never get to exercise any of these options as he decides to fold, which is still the most ideal situation unless he calls and we hold. But anyways, we scoop in a big pot and we're on to the next one. Leave a comment if you think that I played this hand pretty well, or if I should have played it differently, let me know in the comments. So just to set the scene for this hand, I was already planning on leaving, but I didn't get up before I was dealt in. So I looked down at a very pretty hand of Queen 10 of spades. I'm in the big blind, and now when there's a bunch of limps to me, 4 to be exact, I should be putting a raise to at least 20, maybe 25. But I decided since I'm closing the action, and if I just miss the flop, then I can just leave. Why not go ahead and just check my option? So fortunately, or maybe unfortunately I should say, I don't miss the flop. It is Jack 9-3 with 2 spades, giving us an open-ended straight and flush draw with 1 over, or as people often say more simply, the world. So I could put in a check to maybe check raise, but I decided to just do my own betting. I don't mind getting raised because if I do, I'm just going to probably send my stack in. I'd only be in tough shape versus a set of 3s. The other 2 possible sets would have been raised pre-flop, being jacks and 9s. So the size I'm choosing is pot, or $15, and I get 2 calls. One in the +2 and the other one in the cutoff. The turn brings us a 10, improving us to a pair with the aforementioned world that we flopped. But there is a chance this card could have leapfrogged some medium strength hands that called the flop into monsters such as 7-8 or King Queen, which are now straights, or Jack 10 or 9-10 for a 2 pair. So I decided to just check and evaluate what the others want to do. Now the +1 decides to put out a very small bet of 10, which is smaller than my flop bet, and the cutoff calls. Now I could definitely be putting in a raise here, seeing that that's such a weak action, but I don't know, it seems pretty tricky, and so I definitely think I have the best hand, but I just call here and I'm going to see what happens on the river. And the river improves our hand even more with trips. So we now have trips, and I could lead here because the turn bet was pretty much like a check since it was only like 15% pot. But I still decided to check and flow, and now the player decides to once again place a bet, but it's another tiny one of $30. And once again, the cutoff decides to call. And for a second, I was thinking, should I call here? Somebody could have a straight, and they were scared of the board pairing. But then I think, no, I'm 99% sure that my hand is best. So I decided to raise it up pretty small to only $85, targeting any jack that they might have in their hand. But unfortunately, they both fold, and this was the last hand, but I'm curious about how you think I should have played it. There was definitely a lot of inflection points where I could have did things differently. So comment how you would have played it, and now let's get to the outro and see the result.
All right, so we are at the conclusion of this video. Let's go over the results. In session 1, we profited $450. Session 2, we profited $200. That's 6 hours played, $650 of profit. That is over $100 an hour playing live at MGM. And if you want to go back to those hands that I shared on the app, we won $1,400 over the last 2 days. So once again, if you want to get on the app, contact me. All my information is in the description. But altogether, in the last 48 hours, I am at a profit of $2,050. So we're almost halfway there. We're building back up the money since the downswing. And we are going to keep on grinding because we have tons of results. I've been playing poker semi-professionally for close to 3 years now of tracking all my results. So I've never had an unprofitable year, and I've only had 2 unprofitable months. So the July month has been pretty good to me so far, but last month, the end of June, was a disaster. And so that was one of the outliers. So I'm just going to keep grinding, keep playing, keep doing what I'm doing. Just want to say I appreciate y'all once again for the support. And until the next video, holla.